I'm Amanda Knox, and you're listening to Hard Knocks. Welcome to Hard Knocks. Today I speak with Sophie Gilbert, who, if you are not aware, she is an incredible writer and cultural critic known for her work on gender, media, and pop culture. Her criticism has actually earned her incredible recognition, including the 2024 National Magazine Award for Reviews and Criticism, and she was a finalist for the 2022 Pulitzer Prize in Criticism. So serious work, serious thinker, great writer. And we're going to talk today about her most recent book, which is called Grrrl on Grrrl: How Pop Culture Turned a Generation of Women Against Themselves. In this conversation, Sophie and I get personal about our upbringings, the cultural influences of our youth, and we talk about also how we're seeing that repeated again today, but also not just towards women, but towards men, and how both men and women in this current culture of hyper visibility are infantilizing and hypersexualizing themselves at the expense of true power. So I hope you all enjoy this fascinating conversation. Welcome, Sophie Gilbert, to Hard Knocks with Amanda Knox. We are here to speak about your new book, Grrrl on Grrrl, a provocative title, no less. And I guess especially considering me and what I was accused of and dehumanized over, so we can probably get into that. But I think the biggest thing that I'm excited about in talking to you is I finally have someone that I can complain to about Lola Bunny from Space Jam. I feel like no one quite understands the pain of the millennial woman unless they understand Lola Bunny from Space Jam. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've never seen Space Jam. Is she like Jessica Rabbit? I know. Almost watched it the other night, literally with my husband and my kids.
Oh my God. I mean, okay, so look, Space Jam is a super fun, phenomenal film. Love it. But it is, like, if you're talking about a cultural artifact from the late 90s and the early 2000s that shaped how a generation of women viewed themselves and their understanding of their own power, like Lola Bunny, I think perfectly represents this archetype of confident, capable, but hyper sexualized, and which is bizarre considering it's a kid's movie. But to this day, I have these flashbacks to being a young, middle school aged kid going into high school, so going into puberty with Lola Bunny as of all the things that could be the model of that of womanhood for me, it was Lola Bunny. And so, okay, well, I guess if you haven't seen Space Jam,
No, but I'm imagining, I'm a little older than you, I think, and one of my formative childhood movies was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which I've never thought about until this day, but Jessica Rabbit, and she's like, I'm not bad, I'm just drawn that way. Mm-hmm. And she's in this incredibly sexy dress. Yeah, I've never thought about how that might have shaped me until now, but I'll do some thinking on it later.
Well, I was literally compared to Jessica Rabbit in my trial. Did you know that?
I did not know that. Oh, my God.
Yeah, but in the sense that, they were actually trying to make a defensive argument. They were like, she's not bad. She's just drawn that way. And, she's – and in a little bit as a kind of cultural commentary, they were like, look, you guys are drawing – this hypersexualized femme fatale person that doesn't really exist. That's not, that's what the messaging was. But being compared to Jessica Rabbit while on trial was not.
Just never your dreams.
Not my dream. Okay, so maybe we can postpone my complaining about Lola Bunny later, or you should go back into it and write maybe there's an essay for The Atlantic about Lola Bunny. But I seriously, especially as a young woman who was very sporty, right? So I was a sporty young woman.
Yeah.
That was that's a sports movie where the female character is confident and capable and independent, but just hyper sexualized. And I remember even, and I thought I wanted to chat with you about this, and I'm just sort of spilling all of my personal experience at you for a moment. I was remembering how when I was in high school, so I was in high school from 2001 to 2005, all in this period. I remember my soccer coach saying to me that he noticed that there was a style shift that had happened, that like the previous years, so like people who had gone to high school and played soccer, specifically girls who had gone to school and played soccer between like in the late 90s up to 2000, they had been wearing like baggy men's clothing. Like that was the style, like wear men's clothing. You're girls, but you're wearing men's clothing. And then all of a sudden, as soon as I was in high school, it completely shifted to how can we make our jerseys crop tops? How can we like hike up our shorts so that they're super short and we're like having wedgies? Like it was a complete Barbie doll shift, and he was like totally confused by it. And I think a lot of people are interested to understand this sort of progressive and then backlash of like what was happening to feminism in the late 90s, early aughts. And in your view, how is that coming back around today? That's what your book is about. So let's talk about that.
The whole... No, I was in college during that time. I think I started college in 2002 and graduated in 2005. But it was bizarre. And I really remember noticing it right around 2005, 2006, how it suddenly... objectifying oneself was suddenly completely normalized. Not just normalized, it was abnormal to not do it. And I do remember that feeling of like, oh my God, the skirts are so tiny and everyone is orange. Or I mean, in London where I was living at the time, everyone was very, very orange. But it just
also here.
Yeah, you just felt, I mean, the aesthetic of it, I think, was very enticing in lots of ways, and it still is. So when we remember this period, I think Gen Z people especially are drawn to it because it's so too much. It's excessive. It's bedazzled, the pink sparkly cell phones and the velour, like the textures are very rich. But it was just so much about commodifying ourselves. And writing the book, I think, was really... The central question for me was, how did we all get persuaded to live that way? Like, what was the messaging and how did it happen? I think because I was really hoping to find ways to counter it because, everything old is always new again, and these things come back around.
That, it's interesting that you mentioned why Gen Z might find this accessible and might be attracted to this aesthetic. I think it is interesting because I think that there's something very, very different about Gen Z that was not happening when we were, going through puberty and becoming women, which was there wasn't this conversation around being non-binary or like you either were a woman or you were a man. And there wasn't really, I guess maybe there was a moment of like, metrosexual. Do you remember people talking about metrosexual back when we were back in the day? But I don't feel like that was super
sort of pretending to be bisexual. Like, there was a lot of. I was talking to this about someone else the other day. Like, there was this idea that you would have to perform being attracted to women because that was what men liked. I do remember that being a super hot topic in culture. Like, I think about that the Tattoo video. Do you remember Tattoo? All the things she said. The Russian pop band.
What was that?
And they were this Russian pop duo who were discovered by a Russian, I think, psychologist who was super into porn, just as a side note. And so he found these two 16-year-olds, made them into a band, and then spun up this backstory around them, which was that they were in a relationship. They were, a couple, even though they weren't. Both of them were straight. And so they made this very kind of porny music video where they would make out inside what looks like a prison camp, honestly, and they're being watched by a bunch of adults, which now you watch stuff like that and you're like, oh my God. But back then, it was culture.
I wonder, because this is also, when did we get the right for for gay couples to get married. What year was that?
I think slightly different in the US and the UK. Let me see.
Because I'm just wondering if there's a connection between that.
I think it was 2015, the Supreme Court ruling.
Oh, wow. That late in the UK? Okay.
No, in the US.
In the US, even that late? Jeez. God, time flies. Okay, so this is way prior. Okay, fascinating. Anyway, so I'm just wondering, what is it about performing hyper excessive and hyper sexualized forms of gender that is appealing? And I'm wondering if it's for similar reasons or for different reasons than when we were young. What do you think?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I mean, when you were talking about Gen Z, the one thing I was thinking about was we just didn't have the kinds of language then that people have now to describe all kinds of things. I think one of the movies I write about in my book is American Pie. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, yes.
That scene where Nadia, Shannon Elizabeth's character, is filmed, basically set up, trapped, filmed without her consent and broadcast without her knowledge to the entire town, which now, we would call non-consensual pornography. But back then we didn't have those words. I mean, there was so much in the language that was lacking. And I think language is such a profound form of power. So when I think about Gen Z now, we live in such a visual culture, so much is mediated through Instagram and TikTok. And I think a lot of the nostalgia for these eras, for the 90s, I'm seeing all these love story Carolyn Bessette pictures right now on Instagram. But a lot of the nostalgia comes from just seeing the simplicity of these two-dimensional images and not having a lot of the context behind them. So it's much easier to sort of see, I don't know, this really spectacular, gorgeous, bedazzled, aesthetic that you really haven't lived through yourself if you're Gen Z, and to think it's incredibly appealing and to not know what it was actually like to live through it.
Great. So this book is maybe an attempt to be hey, it wasn't actually so glamorous in practice. Is that basically what the ultimate message of the book is?
I mean, it was really, I think the fundamental question was, why were we so cruel? And why, I remember knowing in my heart that a lot of the ways in which we were talking on the internet during that time, during the ways in which we were talking to each other, the comments that we were reading and the posts that I was obsessively refreshing on Perez Hilton, knowing deep down that they were damaging and cruel, but it was just the tone of the early internet. That was how people had been somehow persuaded to talk to each other. And so I really did want to know where that came from, and especially why people hated women so much during the 2000s, and why women were so compelled to just kind of play along, laugh it off, not push back.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that you write is that this cultural milieu convinced this generation of women that sex was our currency, which in a way has kind of always been the case, right? So that wasn't the new part. I think the new part was that objectification was empowering, and that we were a joke.
Yeah, it was this very tricky balancing act where we were supposed to perform sex, but not feel it, not have any authentic desire of our own, not have sex, God forbid, because that would be intensely shaming, but to perform sex in a way that would be entirely about pleasing men and gratifying men and playing up to their idea of what was sexy. And I think someone who's the fundamental example of that, who came along in 1999, right on the cusp of this era, is Britney Spears, who, I just remember... I remember so well, I was a year younger than her, that feeling of the first time I saw that video. She was 16, I think, when she filmed it. She's wearing a school uniform. I mean, she's so young. I look at it now and she just looks so young to me. But this song was so incredible, and it was this cultural juggernaut. And the idea that she was someone who had managed to do this very tricky balancing act where, she was performing sexuality, but with plausible deniability, because she would talk about being a virgin and, she would talk about being a good Christian girl. And that was what the culture wanted. They ate it up. That was exactly what culture wanted from women in that era and, in the next decade that would go on.
Yeah, to be a tease.
Yeah, but not even to be that sort of knowledgeable about it. It was this sort of forced naivety, the idea that we would be sexy, but we wouldn't feel anything sexual because that would be giving us too much power.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, you got to watch Space Jam, my friend,
Okay.
because Lola Bunny she's a little more femme fatale because she's self-aware of her sexual power, but it is a sexual power nevertheless. And like her line, like her thing that everyone remembers her for is when she says, "Don't call me doll." Like, she's like, like a sexual powerhouse, but I'm here to play basketball, so don't you dare, like. And so there's this, like, it's either you're sexy but you don't know it, or you're sexy and you know it, but like, So
Yeah.
I feel like that was the two archetypes at the time. And you're right, like, I too have really struggled with trying to understand the cruelty towards women. And I think the other thing that I really am trying to understand and grapple with to this day, just based on my personal experience, is the pitting of women against each other.
Yeah.
That I am still trying to unravel in my head to this day. And I'm wondering, what can you tell me about that sort of like self-policing, where we're self-policing ourselves and self-policing each other?
Yeah, there are so many aspects of it. And I could talk about this all day, so at some point, please shut me off. But I do think it comes from this shift from third wave feminism to post feminism. And to briefly explain the difference between those things, third wave feminism, I think of it really as Anita Hill testifying in the Clarence Thomas Senate confirmation hearings, like this idea that women were a collective force. They would speak out on each other's behalf. They would fight on each other's behalf. This idea that we were, organizing to improve life and situations for all women. And I think about, in music, you see this so much in the Riot Girl movement, where you have these bands who are just very, very vocal about the conditions they're living under, the threat of sexual assault and harassment. Yes, crappy boyfriends, but also just they're so creative. They're so fertile in so many ways. They made zines, they make all this music. They're so angry. Like, there were so many awesome, angry women in music in the early half of the 90s. And to me, that was very much about the sort of collective force of third wave feminism. And then the Spice Girls came along. I don't want to blame them for this because they didn't uniquely do it. They just more sort of embodied the shift. But they came along and they took this Riot Girl slogan, girl power, which was very intentional. It was about pairing two words that people wouldn't normally associate, girl and power. And when they shouted it, it was intended to make you think, like, why don't girls have power? Why don't we assume that those words go together? And the Spice Girls came along and they were, again, like, so gorgeous, so fun. The music was great. Jams are amazing. I was listening to them the other day. But they took this slogan, girl power, and they neutralized all the tension in it, all of the energy. It was suddenly very celebratory. It was like, look what we've achieved. Women can do anything. Feminism isn't necessary anymore. Like, those women were boring and prudish, and we can be fun and loud. We can live just like men. We can drink. We can have fun. We can, spend money. And money was really the crucial component, because the Spice Girls, before the Spice Girls, bands were very vocal about not wanting to sell out. And the Spice Girls sold everything. They had $500 million worth of commercial deals within their first year and a half as a band. They had body spray, they had Polaroid cameras, they had sneakers, they had everything. And once people saw how much money could be made from this vision of, I don't really want to call it feminism, because it was, in my mind, a sort of distortion of what feminism is about. But they were no longer interested in the angry women of rock. It was all about these sort of individualized and sexualized women who were all about making money, being powerful, being public, being visible. And from that moment, you get, the Britney and the Christina and the pop stars of the 2000s who sell Pepsi and, again, have all these merchandising deals and are very, very good about selling lip gloss to teenagers. And so from that, sorry, again, I told you this is such a long story, but I do think there's something in that. It's the shift from collective action to individualism, where feminism used to be about supporting all women and working together and sisterhood and, intersectional feminism. And suddenly it's just very much about succeeding on your own terms and being as visible as you can and making as much money as you can, having as much fun. And it's sort of the shift towards Sex and the City, I would say, in pop culture as the most visible example.
And so in terms of like going back to the self-policing and the policing of ourselves and pitting ourselves against each other. So just to repeat back to you what I'm hearing, third wave feminism was all about who are we as a group, and this new postmodern feminism, in air quotes, is more about how can I individually as a woman have power, and what does that power look like?
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly right. Yeah, if you think about reality television as another good example, like reality television comes along, and before it was around, if you were a woman in the public eye, you were usually famous for a reason. Like there was a talent that you had, or a job that you did, or there was something that you were known for. And then reality came along and it presented this new bargain, which is that to be famous, all you have to do is be visible. But because you don't have that skill that you're relying on, you need to be the most visible. And if other women are also visible, they threaten you. And so I think it's not coincidental that reality television has that famous mantra, right? I'm not here to make friends. Like suddenly it's all about your own hero edit. It's all about your own journey. It's not about, being a force or a collective group with any of the other women in the show, or complaining about the conditions of how you're working or anything. It's suddenly all about your individual experience and how best you can monetize it towards fame and fortune.
So, interestingly, though, visibility, I think very early on we saw that being a visible woman doesn't come without risk, right? Because, as soon as you're a visible woman, you are primed for punishment, especially within a very tabloid culture. How were women tricked into feeling like positioning themselves to be torn down was the best way to be a woman with power?
I think the ones who were the best at it, at fulfilling this devil's bargain, I think with the paparazzi, with the media at the time, were the ones who didn't care what people said about them. Like Paris Hilton, I think, was in a movie called House of Wax in 2005 or 2006. And it was her big acting debut, I think. And one of the promotional campaigns for the movie was a series of posters all over California, all over Los Angeles, that said, "See Paris die." And she would stand next to them. And it was basically like, if you hate this woman, like everyone does, haha, go see this movie because she'll get stabbed in the head with a spear. And she stood in front of the posters posing, like she was unbothered by it. And I think she felt like her fame, her particular place in the public eye, was in part based on knowing that people might hate her because of her visibility, because of her, how saturated she was and omnipresent in the media environment, and not caring because to her it was worth the bargain. I think of someone like Kim Kardashian is very good at this deal too. Like she just seems impervious to criticism. It seems to bounce right off her. I don't think she's really affected by it all that much. But there were plenty of women at the time who were devastated by the tabloids. Obviously, Britney was an example. I mean, you see all these women in really 2005, 2006, 2007 being a especially calamitous year, where women were just constantly getting arrested, going to rehab, being stalked by paparazzi, having these breakdowns in the public eye. And the treatment of them was so cruel because it was the idea that they were failing at this project of visibility that they had signed up for. They weren't doing their part. They were drunk, or they were sloppy, or like Amy Winehouse's case, they weren't presenting themselves well enough. They weren't doing the part that they were supposed to do.
I think it's a really interesting point of this, like, you have to be in on the joke in order to succeed.
Yeah.
Like, you have to know that by being a visible woman that you're going to be hated, and you have to sort of love and lean into and expect that hatred and and be sort of unmoved by that. Like, it's a really interesting, it's a provocative idea, because it does sound like so masculine in like, it's a very masculine, like, I don't care what, I'm an independent it's me against the world kind of vibes. Yeah. When, like, deep down, we are all social creatures and we are all embedded with each other. And so, of course, like, there's a reason why exile was considered a fate worse than death in much of human societies. And so it's interesting that there was this expectation of women to to sort of embrace being ostracized as part of it. And if you failed at that, that somehow made you pathetic and worthy of derision.
Yeah. And the idea that you're constantly making fun of yourself as well. Like your whole life, your whole public persona is in part about winking, because it's knowing how ridiculous you're being, but knowing also that that's what you're supposed to be. That's what the cameras want to see.
Okay.
No, that idea of being shunned is fascinating. It's sort of such a bastardization of the social compact, I think.
Yeah. I mean, my own experience with the tabloids has certainly given me insight into how utterly dehumanizing it is, in the sense that I don't even say that word as in like, oh, it hurt my feelings. It was like it just literally made up a different person who didn't really exist, who represented this archetype that fed into people's like sexual fantasies, as well as their like ideas around hatred of women. Like it sort of just like was a perfect little package that was delivered by the tabloids for the the world to consume. This was happening in my life in 2007 through 2015.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, it's interesting that you talk about how you're seeing you started thinking about writing this book in the early 2020s, in part because you were responding to what felt like a renewal of this like recreational misogyny. There's, the cult following of Andrew Tate. There's Hillary Clinton's loss in 2016, the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022, Kamala Harris's loss in 2024. We're just seeing this sort of like the third wave of feminism where women are a collective action and we actually have political power, and it doesn't have anything to do with our reproductive functions. Yeah. Like, if anything, our reproductive functions are having more power imposed upon them. Like, we're seeing that rollback. But was there a period when that wasn't happening between the end of the 90s and today, or has it all been like, it sounds like in the early 90s, when I was too young to be aware of anything, there was this like glorious moment where women were actually working together and seeking real power, and there wasn't as intense of a focus on our bodies or on a individual, like hypersexualization. Was that? Is that like an anomaly in the human experience of women? Because even in the 80s, there was the hypersexualization of women. Like, how is that different?
I mean, to be clear, I don't think the early 90s were, this period of utopia for women. Like, I think in some ways we remember the feminism from that moment now because of what it was fighting against, the climate of sexual harassment. A lot of the women in music were so vocal about feminism and gender equality. Was their treatment in the music press at the time was just astonishingly vile. Like the ways in which they were posed in magazines, and they were really just, there was a cover of, I think, Q magazine in 1992 that put women artists on the front, and the headline was hips, lips, tits, power. Like it was, I think so much of what women were doing in that moment was really fighting back. And in some ways, the sort of period of relief that came with post-feminism towards the end of the 90s was the idea that women had surmounted, because of the activism, they had sort of cemented their gains, and they had moved through that difficult era, and we were heading towards a glorious new millennium of equality and freedom and women being liberated to do whatever they want. Which is funny now in retrospect, having lived through the 2000s. But there was this sort of brief period, I think, of hope. I mean, I think that the cycle throughout the period that I was studying, and it was really a 30-year period from the 90s through sort of 2024 almost, but mostly 2020, is every time women are perceived to be making strides, this is literally a quote from Susan Faludi's Backlash, there is a backlash. There's a profound backlash. So I think a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of the really grotesque misogyny coming from the right in the US and coming from the Manosphere is a backlash to what happened with the Me Too movement, which in turn was a backlash to Trump's election. So, I mean, but whenever people consider women to be making progress as a group, there is always a profound backlash against that in the media and the culture and politics. Does that mean we should stop trying? No. But I think what I hope it means is that because we're in such a period of really egregious misogyny right now, that there will be a counter movement soon and we'll head in another direction. I hope men at least will realize that the messaging they're getting from the Manosphere is a con that is not working for them in any way. But maybe my hopes are too high on that front.
Yeah, I know. I'm really curious about, it's funny because I don't have a lot of personal contact with the Manosphere. I think, if anything, my direct contact, and this is just me sort of reflecting back and being like, okay, what is my experience of being a visible woman next to the Manosphere? Mm-hmm. And interestingly, I have seen that older men in the Manosphere, so like, the Joe Rogans of the Manosphere, are actually like the girl dads of the Manosphere are really, like, I have seen them be very positive towards someone like me who is a young woman. Or I guess I'm not so young anymore. I'm 38. But when I was younger, I was going through this incredible experience that was a hypersexualized vilification. And I've somehow emerged, not unscathed, but I haven't been destroyed by that experience. And so the messaging that I get from a lot of the girl dads and like the millennial men is they're like, oh God, please don't let our daughters have to go through what our wives had to go through. But we're seeing, like, who ultimately is pushing the culture of the Manosphere today? If it's not the millennial dads, like who?
There's a documentary that just came out on Netflix by Louis Theroux, who's a really good British documentarian, where he meets some of these Manosphere streamers who, most of them are very young. And I say that because they're incredibly juvenile and they seem to be playing to an audience of 12-year-olds. I mean, we have this meme at the moment, everyone is 12, but I think in the Manosphere, everyone is even younger. Like, it feels like they are, I mean, there's a scene where one of the influencers comes in and he points at his girlfriend who's lying there in a bikini, and he says something like, "That's the dishwasher," which is literally a joke that boys used to tell me in the playground, I think, when I was 7 or 8. Like, what do you do if the dishwasher breaks? Kick her. Like, these really absurd, sort of cartoonishly stupid jokes that boys in the playground would tell each other. That's about the intellectual level that the Manosphere is playing at right now. So it is funny. There is a huge generational difference, I think, between the older men who've been around a while, who've lived a while, who maybe are married or have had some marriages, have children. They're playing to a male audience, but they're not dishing out the same kind of really virulent misogyny that the younger influencers are doing, and making a lot of money off in the process, I should say.
Is that what it all comes down to? Just like in the same way that people saw an opportunity to commodify girl power, they're now seeing an opportunity to commodify man power?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the algorithms of the social media products that we use reward extremity. Like, if they can capture your attention for a second by showing you something extreme, whatever it might be, that's better than not capturing your attention at all. And so it's not coincidental that it has rewarded this generation of people who are saying, like, the most absurdly sexist things that anyone could ever think of. And, so much of it is just nonsensical. I'm thinking about Andrew Tate the other day being like, I would never read a book. Like, I'm too powerful for books. Books could never, like, my brain would never work that way. And it's just, when you think about it, it's laughable. But the point is not to say something that is coherent on any intellectual level. It's just to capture someone's attention for the 15 or 20 seconds that it takes them to watch the clip.
Okay. I want to know.
In some ways, actually, no, sorry to interrupt, but in some ways it is very similar to what we were just talking about with Paris Hilton. Like, it's this idea that you can weaponize, I think, attention in a way that can be very lucrative. Although in this case, they're sending hate outward rather than directing it inward. Yeah.
So one thing that I noticed in your book is you talk a little bit about the sleight of hand that is at work, where, you know, objectification being twisted into empowerment. And I wonder, so first of all, can you talk about that as the experience of women? So again, going back to the Spice Girl era of things, which it's just so bizarre for me to be like to hear all of these like cultural touchstones. Like, of course, I was listening to the Spice Girls, and of course, you know, it's like Pokemon cards. Like, you and your gaggle of girlfriends all decide which one you are. Are you sexy Spice, or are you like baby Spice that's like sucking on your lollipop all sexily? Like, everyone does the dances, they do the poses. Like, so I'm curious to you for your perspective of if this sleight of hand that is turning objectification into empowerment for women in the, you know, again, the late 90s, early aughts, is there a sleight of hand at work for young men today? And if so, what if it's not objectification as empowerment? What is it?
Have you heard of the looks maxing movement online? Like this community of men?
I just heard about that. Is that... Explain.
It's this community of men who are very much into maximizing what they perceive as their attractiveness, not to be sexy towards women because they hate and disdain women, to be clear, but to gain kudos from other men. And so there are
Greeks during the Olympics, the ancient Greeks. Like, is that what this is?
Yeah, but there's one very famous person, like sort of the prince of the looks maxing movement is a guy called Clavicular, who supposedly breaks his own jawbones with a hammer to make his jaw more masculine, and does occasionally crystal meth to keep his weight down. I mean, all of this is lore, so it's without being able to fact check it. It's so much of it is pot about, I think, the mythos and the extremity of the reputation. But there's this huge community of men online who are just absolutely obsessed with physical attractiveness in a way that women were really being encouraged to focus on self-optimization in the 2000s. I mean, I'm sure you remember the reality shows of that time, like the makeover shows. Just this idea that it was your obligation almost as a woman in that period to be as hot and sexy as you could be. And we had all these shows, Extreme Makeover, The Swan, you know, I Want a Famous Face, in which you would start with ordinary looking people, and by the end they would be transformed supposedly into these, you know, the best version of themselves. And it's funny now because men are having this messaging come from all these figures on the internet, and it's obviously not sincere, and it's obviously intensely damaging, but it is all about selling them things, selling them products, selling them, you know, pyramid schemes, selling them.
Well, it sounds like it's infantilizing too. Like, yeah. I mean, it 100%. Sounds like we're seeing men experiencing that today, what women were experiencing when we were in high school.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, just the idea that more and more men are getting Botox, or more and more men are having, you know, calf implants, or thinking about pec surgery. It's men being subjected to the same kind of self-scrutiny and self-surveillance that women have experienced for a long time. But it's all about selling them things.
Do you think that it will affect their sense of power the way that it affected ours? Because one of the consequences that you raise in your book is that we as women were made to feel inadequate, and our ambition, like collectively as women, the ceiling of our ambition was lowered.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's a danger for what is happening for men right now?
I'm sure. I mean, part of beauty culture, part of the trap that it puts you in, is it makes you so focused on looking inward, so obsessed with the project of yourself. Like being on a diet, all you can think about is food and restriction and calories, and you're so sort of fixated on yourself that you're not looking outward. You're not thinking about, you know, actually, if I were not thinking about my diet or hating myself for a day. Like, what would I want? What would I imagine in the world? What would be possible for me, for other women? Like, what would I visualize? It's this sort of idea that it's a big project of distraction. And so, yeah, of course, like the men who are most susceptible to this kind of messaging from looks maxing. It's such a stupid word. I hate saying it out loud. But, of course, it's Clavicular, I think, was interviewed. He's been interviewed a lot recently. And it gets to the point where you're like, really? More attention? But he said he's like not interested in politics at all. And weirdly, even though he seems very far right, he said he would vote for Gavin Newsom over J.D. Vance in an imagined presidential race because Newsom is better looking. So...
Okay, so that's fascinating. Okay, right. So it's truly... We're at an age where finally, for the first time, men are going, I don't care about power, I care about looks.
Yes. Men are hating themselves as much as women always have. I don't know if that's progress. It doesn't feel like it to me.
I mean, I certainly don't. That doesn't make me feel better about my son growing up in this world.
Well, this is a very extreme corner of the internet. And I do think there's a good number of young men who are able to see it as performative and able to see it as satire in the way that, in the 2000s I looked at Paris Hilton. I'm not sure I found her aspirational. Like, I'm sure I liked her handbags, and I thought she was beautiful and stuff, but I'm not sure that was the sort of career that I was hoping to emulate. Or, I mean, yes, it's ludicrous that could have been possible, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's aspirational so much as for a lot of people it's simple entertainment.
Well, I think it's aspirational in the sense that I think people assume that if you are visible, you are well compensated for being visible. Yes. And I mean, that's something that I have, and also that visibility in the way that like all press is good press ultimately benefits you, right? Like I think there's this illusion that it's better to be visible than not visible, because if you're not visible, then there's no way for you to gain anything. Like, at least attention is currency. And so if you can have attention, be it good or bad, somehow that's working in your favor, I think is what I think a lot of people assume. And I've really struggled with this personally because, like, I will never forget how, when I came back from prison, like I was completely I was totally traumatized from being so highly visible, but at the same time I was like visible in the public sphere, but I had been locked away in a literal cage that entire time. And then so to suddenly go back into the world of people who had been consuming that version of me that there was, in a way, prison had been the sort of buffer between me and having to interact with the world that was treating me or like had been consuming me as a commodity. And so I'm still sort of like grappling with that disconnect that I feel between my own personal experience and other people's experience of me. And very, very early on, my AP English teacher from high school invited me to come and talk to her AP English class of like 12 students, just because she was like, here's, a young person who has gone through a crazy experience. She probably has something wise to tell my students, who are going off to college. Amanda, tell your horror story. Like, be the cautionary tale, I guess. And so I go to the class and I'm utterly unprepared. Like I'm barely able to like speak to people in general, much less to a room full of people that I don't know. Yeah. But I go there and I sort of fumble my way through talking about how horrible it was to have my whole life and my identity stolen from me along with my freedom. And the first question that I got after I sort of spoke was from a female student who asked, so what's it like to be famous?
Oh my God.
And I was just devastated because I was like, wow, there is a complete disconnect between what my experience of fame is and what I understand from your question, which is like everyone here aspires for fame because somehow that makes us feel secure.
Yeah. Well, it was the kind of thing that we were sold as currency in this moment. I mean, I wanted to ask you a question, if that's okay. Because you've been so fearless about using your voice in terms of correcting people's understanding of you and using, through your writing, through your speech, through your words, like presenting a version of you that is completely different from the tabloid narrative. And I wondered, like, do you feel that you have successfully been able to reframe the way that you are as a public person? Like, do you feel like you've successfully changed the way that people think about you?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that shifting from a vilified, hypersexualized woman with that nobody felt had anything worthwhile to say to, somebody who's considered an authority in the space, who is not, like, I do not hypersexualize myself typically. And so I feel like in that way, I have succeeded. A way that I don't feel that I have succeeded, however, is that I'm still typically thought of in terms of true crime.
Yeah.
So, which is, like, if you know me as a person, is not my passion, is not my interest in the sense that, like, prior to all of this happening to me, I never was interested in true crime. I knew absolutely nothing about the criminal justice system. And the only reason why I work in this space and talk about this space today is because I learned a lot about it and I became a kind of expert on it without meaning to. And that is an avenue for me to apply and interact in the world in a serious way.
Yeah.
I don't think that I've achieved the level of fully being able to reclaim myself because I still am not really known for what my actual interests are, which are a lot more frivolous and like are not at all related to true crime at all. I think that's where I'm still, just personally, I'm at a sort of crisis point in my self-evolution because in a weird way I feel as if, like, very recently I've been able to feel reclaimed. Like, I have the project of reclaiming my identity from the horrible, misogynistic, like, vilified version of me that existed for so long. Like, it's taken me 18 years, but, like, I finally feel like I have a cap on that, even though it's not perfect. Like, I have I feel like I understand it and I have a handle on it. The project of just being a silly person who likes, sci-fi and fantasy and, that kind of thing, that is the next adventure, I feel. But I personally am just speaking of from as a visible woman to a visible woman, I'm having a little bit of an existential crisis about it because there is a kind of expectation that I fulfill this role, particularly because this role didn't really exist until I came to the table. Like, prior to my case blowing up in the media, women as figures who were not just, like, derided, but, like, actively vilified and imprisoned for things that they didn't do, or vilified as people who they were not, like, absolutely were not. There wasn't really, like, a figurehead for that.
Yeah.
And so I do feel a sense of responsibility because I know I'm not the only woman who's gone through it, and I'm not the only woman who's going to go through it in the future. So I feel like I do have a kind of like project of trying to figure out how women are vilified and why. And that's why I'm super interested in this, in your book, because it is about, it's that first stage of vilification, which is dehumanization, which is infantilizing, which is, you know, making women feel like they only have so many options and that they can only be considered in so many ways, you know?
Yeah. Well, the reason why I asked about this project of, the reason why I find this question of reclamation really fascinating is because, you know, we talked about in the book, there are all these shifts, progress, backlash. And after the decade of the 2000s where women really were hypersexualized, vilified, you know, scolded, shamed, really just dehumanized in the public eye in the most horrific way, there was this response in the 2010s, and a lot of it was verbal. It came out in writing, it came out in blogs, it came out in books. Women fought back, and they fought back by telling the truth about their lives. Often in, you know, through memoir, or, you know, I think about the TV show Girls is a really good example.
Yep.
It's like the real life is not Sex and the City. It is not porn. It is like, this is how we live. This is how absurd it can be. This is how, you know, humiliating, but also funny and vibrant and real. There was this real wave of first-person women's writing in the 2010s that was about reclaiming humanity, I think, and telling the truth about the conditions that women were living under and really fighting to assert for the fact that we are human and we have, you know, minds and we suffer and we bleed, and making that really hard to ignore in culture. And I think it was really powerful, and so much of it did pave the way for the Me Too movement. Like, we were more conditioned by reading all of this work to take women at their word when they started coming forward and speaking about what had happened to them. But one of the consequences is that when we present ourselves in this way, or when we take ourselves seriously as subjects, we're always claimed, like, we're criticized for being narcissistic.
Oh yeah. Oh, don't get me started on yes, I'm a narcissist. Of course I'm a narcissist. Yeah. No, I'm 100% have the same experience of, you know, doing the work of like being very vulnerable and honest about my humanity. Like, I'm not this patron saint, and but I'm not this diabolical seductress. Like, I'm a human being. Here I am, warts and all. Absolutely. I constantly get the narcissism charge to this day. But also, interestingly, and I'm curious to know what you think about this, I also get pitted against my dead roommate, where people say that not only am I narcissistic, but the act of me talking about my own life is at the expense of the person the other woman who was the center of this story that sort of brought me to the public consciousness. And so I am always measured against my dead roommate. And that, to me, is, I'm curious to know, like, I have felt that, like, the world has pitted me against her for no reason, like, especially in the, like, I understand during the course of the trial when I was literally being accused, like, that made sense that we were, you know, pitted against each other, even though it was made up and no testimony ever came forward saying we ever argued with each other. Like, there was just, like, the way that she was turned into, like, the hyper prudish version of women, and I was turned into the hypersexualized version of women, and then it was sort of understood that, oh, of course they hated each other. Like, there was a lot of, like, misogyny baked into the way that we were pitted against each other at trial. But I think the more subtle and interesting, but subtle and cruel and devastating version of this is in the aftermath, when I've been recognized as innocent, recognized as having nothing to do with her death. And yet, still, people accuse me of narcissism and of being offensive to her family, to her memory, because I put myself out there and tell my own story.
It's this pattern, I think, that whenever women are honest enough and thoughtful enough and truthful enough about saying what has happened to them, There's this idea, I guess maybe it's because of a scarcity mindset and how many women can coexist in media at any one time, but there's this idea that someone else is being silenced, or someone else is being mistreated by the fact that you are simply telling your truth. Like one of the examples I use in the book is Nora Ephron wrote the book Heartburn. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's an amazing, slightly fictionalized account of finding out that her husband was cheating on her while she was pregnant. And so she published this book, and everyone knew it was based on her real life experiences. And she was vilified in the press for betraying her husband, betraying her children, when all she was trying to do, I think, was to reclaim some of her power. And you see it again, I think I don't know if you heard Lily Allen's album that came out last year, West End Girl, but she made a whole album about basically the same thing, marital betrayal. She tried to be polyamorous for her husband, but he couldn't even stick to the boundaries of that, and she was devastated. And I remember that album being criticized so much because it was this idea that her ex-husband's fragile mental health might be at stake because she had come out by, simply telling the truth about the state of their marriage. So it's like you can't win. You just can't win because and it's not something that men are ever subjected to. Like, I don't think anyone has ever criticized a male memoirist for, talking about his wife in a way that silences her. It's just a specific thing that happens to women when they try to speak out.
Well, it's nice to know I'm in good company at the
very You, Nora Ephron, Lily Allen.
Ay. Well, we are wrapping up here. There's so much to get into with your book, so I hope I'm going to pull it up again for everyone. Girl on Girl, How Pop Culture Turned a Generation of Women Against Themselves. There's so much to get into, so I hope people will read it. But in the meantime, is there anything else you want to say before I let you go and get on with your day?
No, I don't think so. I've just loved talking to you. I admire so much just how much you have turned what happened to you into a real drive to fight for others. I always think that's the most powerful thing a woman can do when she's been through fire like that, is to try and prevent it happening again to other people. So it's just been a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Sophie. Take care.
You too.